Season-defining games already in early October. Is this the week that Kansas clicks its heels and goes back to losing? Or is this the week that we find out that Oklahoma is in trouble? This is the College Game Day Podcast for Friday, October 7th. Rece Davis, Pete Thamel, and Bill Connelly here to make picks. Let's start with this. How did we do last week, Taylor? Because Pete and I, we talk on Saturday morning. We never remember who we picked.
No.
We don't even know who we're rooting for or against, which is bad. But,
it's more relaxing.
We rely on you. Do you know who you picked, Bill? Are you rooting for your team?
No, I mean, I basically know because I do follow my numbers most of the time, but I always go against them a couple times and I forget which games those are. So I lose track.
I probably shouldn't say that because that suggests that we're not convicted about our picks. That's not true. I get distracted. The show's coming, and then by then I'm like, wait, did I take the 6 or did I lay the 6? And you try to remember, especially on these tight games. So how did we do last week? How'd we do last week, Taylor?
So Bill went 6-6. Rece, you went 6-6, and Pete went 5-7. So not true. We've seen worse weeks on the pod for sure.
We did, but we saw better weeks the week before.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, we were killing it last week.
Undisciplined, talkative, and sucking less.
Yeah. So, Bill, you're taking. We were talking about this just before we started, and I wanted to start with this. Do you write about soccer too?
Yeah.
Football, as they call it in Europe. Do you do that because you really love it, or do you do that because you think somehow it makes you this more erudite, cultured gentleman because you do that too?
I don't do it to make my Twitter followers happy. I'll say that much because I'm pretty much guaranteed to alienate a certain percentage of Twitter followers, no matter what I put out in a given week, because either you followed me for football and you don't really care, or you followed me for soccer and you're really just getting drowned out for most of the week. So good experiences all around. I'm very customer friendly. I've always enjoyed soccer. Coming here, the data I had access to and all that kind of made it a little better because I knew whether I was full of crap or not. And it really is the history and the passion involved there. The more familiar you are with college football, even if you don't actually like soccer, the more familiar you'll be with just the landscape of European soccer and all the histories and all the rivalries and everything that goes on. So I feel like it was a pretty natural thing to take on, and I definitely like doing it.
Well, the reason, Pete, that we bring it up is because Ted Lasso used to coach at Wichita State, and the actual person is a Kansas guy. Jason Sudeikis is a Kansas guy, which probably offends Bill's sensibilities as a Missouri guy too.
I think that those sensibilities have been pushed all over the place in these last few weeks. I'm getting pretty used to it by now.
If you met Jason Sudeikis, would you wear your Barry Odom jersey that you had in college? Your Barry Odom?
I do need to find that. My wall's still blank.
I would love if you wore that on the pod one
right
week.
Back here.
No, I think you need to wear it 1 week on the pod. If Arkansas comes through for you on like a backdoor cover, I think you really need to just bust that out 1 week. Just not show up in one of your designer hoodies, but instead show up.
You're going to see me in this thing for the rest of the season. We've reached Sherpa hoodie season. No, I do. Barry seems to need a little bit of extra oomph this year. It's not going all that well. So, maybe if I'm feeling kind one of these weeks, I'll find where it is and throw it on. And it wasn't, for the record, this was 1997, so it wasn't an official, didn't have Odom on the back or anything. It was just one of those team store sales when they're like, hey, we got all these jerseys. Do you want one for $30? And I found number 39 and said, I own myself a Barry Odom jersey.
Barry Odom.
I can't wait to tell Barry this someday.
Yeah.
Barry's got his hands full dealing with Will Rogers and the fellas on Saturday, I think.
Yeah. Cowbells
Arkansas,
can't be fun for Barry.
Mississippi State. Sam Pittman is beating Mike Leach in both of their meetings as head coach. So, but Rogers thrown for 400 yards. He's tied Tim Couch for the most 400-yard games in SEC history. What's the common denominator there between Will Rogers and Tim Couch? Let me think for just a second. I guess it's Mike Leach, right?
Yeah.
He's done basically. I thought Mississippi State could be really, really solid this year, and they have been, except for 30 minutes against LSU, and that kind of ruined the narrative a little bit. But they've looked great since, and I'm curious when Arkansas, Kentucky, Alabama, Auburn, Georgia, they could either run some ambitions or get a coach fired here in the next few weeks.
But Lee Corso calls them sometimes we're approaching the season, and it's earlier than ever in college football for the old JS game, the job saver, and it's getting earlier and earlier these days. Do your numbers show any JS games this weekend, Bill?
Well, I mean, every Auburn game is a JS game. Let's be honest. I actually I'm kind of actually, I don't even know if we're picking Auburn, Georgia, because it's not exactly a huge game this week. But I feel pretty good about Auburn covering just as a challenge to Georgia, because they have taken their time showing up the last couple of weeks, and they could turn around and be up 28-0 after a quarter, and Brian Harson's gone by halftime. I don't know, but that's the one. And of course, we don't know all the JS games out there, because I certainly didn't know Wisconsin, Illinois was one last week. So surprises all around, I guess.
I have a definitive one. Louisville at Virginia, noon ACC network.
Okay, yeah.
That's a good one, Pete.
And I believe there's a bye for the Cardinals following that.
Right.
That hasn't been the same there since the flirtation with South Carolina, right? I mean, it just hasn't been the same at Louisville.
That's fair to say. Now there has been an AD change since then, but he did his original 6-year deal, and that has not been extended. So we're not talking sort of the gobs of Nebraska money here. We're probably in the neighborhood of $5 million, which I'm not going to ever sneeze at that. Just like the 11 million Chris ended up with, which was almost cut in half. Like, that's still a lot of money. I never want to minimize millions, because millions are hard to find on any college campus, especially a public school. Now, again, there's foundations and donors and all that good stuff.
There are horses in Louisville.
There's horses and bourbon. That's pretty much that's what they are run on. Boston's run on Duncan. The Young Center is run on horses, bourbon, probably some Taco Bell too.
Well, my suggestion was that they might be able to find money around those horses too, to be able to do that, because that's the thing. The ACC teams, the big checks coming in, at least to the schools, and media rights, not the same as what the Big Ten can count on and what the SEC can count on in coming years. And maybe it changes the calculus a little bit for them, but it's a fascinating thing to watch all these JS games. So we might as well, thankfully our jobs don't rely on picking these games correctly and winning.
We'd all be fired. It would be Sarah and Taylor hosting the podcast,
and then they'd get fired because they miss too. Everybody does. I mean, except the Bear. I don't know what the Bear did last week, but he's been on fire on the board. 2-1. Very consistent. It's like
watch your back, Bill.
Like a methodical ground attack.
Yeah, while we were all kicking butt on the podcast 2 weeks ago, I always put like 5 best bets in my Friday column. They went 1-4, and then last week we revert to form, and we all go back around 500, and I went 4-0. The other one that UCF SMU under was the other one, but that was. It's been a roller coaster, and I haven't really you never really feel like you have your feet underneath you making these picks.
It's fun though. I mean, like the great Barry Sachs, former senior coordinating producer at ESPN, used to say, "Just tell me who and by how many." That's what he wanted to know. So Taylor, that's where we are. Let's make some picks here on the Friday edition of the College Game Day Podcast.
All right, gents. First up, Tennessee is a 3-point favorite headed to LSU. Let's go, Rece, Pete, Bill.
And that little rejoinder there is a reminder that we have stakes wagered on. Yeah. That's the stakes of the picks. The race for the ribeye, week number 6. Tennessee at LSU. LSU won an SEC game last week with 5 yards passing in the second half. Jaden Daniels left that game. Whether he'll be able to go, hopefully he will be able to go for LSU. If not, even if he is able to go, I think there's too much firepower for Tennessee. I think they're fortunate to catch them at 11 a.m. local time, which seems like a silly thing to say unless you've actually been to Baton Rouge and see how irritated their fans are when they have to play that early game. And it's not quite the same environment that it is for a night game, especially, but they can also get revved up for a big 3:30 Eastern time window game. I think Tennessee covers this game, wins, and sets up the showdown with Alabama next week, coming in undefeated.
I'll be. So would we think of LSU differently if there was not a blocked extra point on the opening weekend? Would we perceive them, even with their recent struggles with the pass game, and Jaden Daniels has been up and down, and they had a players only meeting to try to, with the receivers and the quarterbacks this week, to try to get on the same page a little bit more. But would we think of LSU drastically differently if not that for that one data point there? So I will default to Brian Kelly in close games, and I will default to LSU at home in this. And I just think Tennessee's defense has not truly been stressed yet. And I'm not saying LSU is designed to do it, but I do think that, especially with Jaden Daniels with his legs, and maybe they use that to get him going a little bit more, that I think that LSU can kind of figure out a way to ham and egg this thing.
Yeah, I mean, the big plays are non-existent in the LSU offense, but they are still pretty efficient. They're moving the chains. They're doing okay in the field position battle, things like that. So, I mean, they're a real 4-1. Let's put it that way. It's not like they've been kind of lucky and skated by. Last week was a little lucky, a little weird, but that's just an Auburn game for you, I guess. I would feel better about this game if Tennessee's biggest weakness wasn't they give up too many big plays, because I'm not sure how much that applies against an LSU team that doesn't make any. And that makes it a weird matchup. My numbers say like Tennessee by 1.9. So like right at the line, I don't get a lot of value from that. I kind of feel better about Tennessee just because the proven commodities, the fact that they almost certainly will make more big plays. And that's what's almost tripped them up a couple of times this season. I do feel better about that. And as somebody who went to the Missouri night game last week, first night game they've had there in, I don't know, 26 years or something, that environment really does make a difference between the 7-something o'clock and the 11 o'clock something. So I do feel better about Tennessee here.
Let me just sneak in that you should keep your eye on Cedric Tillman if you're going to invest in this game. He obviously had the tightrope ankle surgery. There's a chance he comes back, but that obviously is going to be a big factor into Tennessee's ability to explode. So for the investors, keep your eyes open Saturday morning.
That's really interesting before we go to the next one, because the way it's been explained to me, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend I'm a trainer or a surgeon, but the tightrope surgery for an ankle is something that a guy can come back from in a couple of weeks if he's, say, an offensive lineman, if he's a quarterback who's not a right. This is a running threat. This is a little different for a skill player coming back from that. And, everybody heals differently, and it's a pretty remarkable surgery to give guys the opportunity to overcome these high ankle sprains early. But that would be quite a fascinating thing if Cedric Tillman could play, 2 weeks after having the tightrope? That's at a skill position that relies on speed and cutting. That'd be impressive. It's not like he's a left tackle, not that those guys don't rely on their feet, but they're not, it's not the same type of movement. So
yeah. In the way those receivers have to run routes and run routes and run routes, we obviously, the famous tightrope was Bryce Young, right? Was that Tua? Or is Tua? No, I'm sorry, it was Tua. The famous tightrope was Tua. And the thought was after the tightrope, he was going to be limited in his mobility, right? But you can drop back and throw, but putting and exploding are different things on the tightrope.
Yeah. Bert McCoy and Mel Keaton, by the way, both have risen to the challenge so far.
Yes.
So I do feel better about that than I would have otherwise. So I don't, obviously he makes them better, but I still feel pretty confident in Tennessee.
Yeah, I'm going Tennessee too, but this could be a Kayshon Boutte emergence moment because they haven't been able to get him going. Taylor, what's next?
Him and Quentin Johnston. We're just going to sit back and wait.
It's like a Joseph Ngata at Clemson. You just keep waiting for him to be great.
All right, it's the Ting in your Tang Tang game. College game day headed to Lawrence as well as TCU, the 7-point favorite, facing off against Kansas. Let's go, Pete, Bill, Rece.
Well, I certainly have picked against Kansas plenty enough to have been burnt by it. I'm excited to head to Lawrence this week. By the time our listeners have this podcast, we will likely have gained 3 pounds from all the ribs that we plan on digesting while we're there. Bill, open to suggestions if you have any for that. Okay, good. We are certainly, there's one thing that aligns Rece and I is that our love of large amounts of meat being served on large platters. So we are wide open to suggestions. I am not wide open to the idea of Kansas winning this game. I think TCU is going to come in. I think they're going to flash their speed. I think Kansas is really going to struggle with that. And I think they run that a little bit of the 3-3-5 that's going to be designed to slow down the run option of Daniels. And I think they're just going to, have a superior athlete. And Max Duggan has been, look, Jalen Daniels should be in the Heisman conversation. If Max Duggan lights it up on Saturday, I think he's got to insert himself in there at some point. I mean, his numbers are preposterous. So I just like the overall general skill of where TCU is better. And I think we did see a little bit of what the Kansas offense could struggle with when they face sort of a higher end defense.
Yeah, I mean, Max Duggan right now, third in total QBR, like 75% completion rate. It's been pretty crazy. I do feel pretty good about TCU. I don't want to overreact to last week because we might just find out that OU's just not very good defensively. They kind of threw us off the scent a little bit in those first 3 weeks, but 2 straight weeks of getting torched by pretty different offenses. And I'm trying not to overreact. I can't help but overreact to the speed we saw in that game. They've got a ton of it, and it makes last year's struggles a little more inexplicable, to be honest. But this is the most explosive offense in the country right now. I assume that makes a difference. Kansas, this has been a really fun story to write. And obviously they're just about assured of a bowl game at this point, and things are going to keep cruising along. But, I'm struggling to get past the fact that, in my SP Plus rankings, they've faced 2 good offenses or 2 top 50 offenses, and they've allowed 38 points a game. They've faced 1 top 60 defense, and they scored 14 points. So it feels like this comes crashing down at some point. If TCU stays hot, then it'll probably be this week. And I'm going to pick TCU to cover. I will say this is a Sonny Dykes team. And at some point we might be talking about the Sonny Dykes fade again, because he's kind of he had a history of that at Cal and SMU and whatnot. But I mean, it's hard to anticipate that one coming with as good as they looked last week. So I'm going TCU.
Bill, it's funny, great minds. I brought up the fade on Wednesday on the podcast, losing 4 of 5, 3 of 5, 3 of 5, 3 of 5, in his time at SMU. It makes it sound like I think that he's not a good coach. I think he's an outstanding coach. And as for Max Duggan, that performance against Oklahoma, only 2 players in Big 12 history have had 300 yards passing, 3 touchdowns, 100 yards on the ground, and 2 rushing touchdowns in a game. Max Duggan and Jalen Hurts. That's it. Also consider that when College Game Day is present for a TCU game on campus, the Horned Frogs are 5-0, undefeated. Totally agree with you on all of the numbers about the level of competition that Kansas has faced and the numbers that they've put up against that type of competition and how their offense was slowed down by Iowa State. And all of that being said, I suspect TCU will probably win the game, but there is no way I'm not taking the Jayhawks and the 7 at home. So I will take Kansas and the 7. I'll take the points. Home dogs by a touchdown. I like my odds there, even though I do think TCU is the superior team. I know Kansas is in uncharted territory. Having game day there for a first time can be a little much for some programs, but I think Leipold's a pretty steady influence on the group. I think Kansas is good. And as much as we can say Iowa State slowed them down, and they did, I like the fact that Kansas showed they can win a different kind of game. They can win a high-scoring, fast-paced game, and they can win 14-11. So I'm going to take the Jayhawks and the points on Saturday.
Bill, have you ever been to a game at Kansas, a football game?
I've been to a couple terrible Kansas-Missouri games, yes.
Okay. What do you think the environment will be like their game day? I've never been to a Kansas football game.
Well, it's gonna be great because it's gonna be a full house, and the game day effect there just makes it a big day long experience and whatnot. It'll be a great environment. they weren't amazing environments when in the late 90s and early 2000s for the games I went to, but it'll be all you hope for, I assume.
Okay. I'm just curious, just like, sometimes when the fan base has a longing, you know what I mean? Like, and they've waited for their moment, they really show, but I don't just have a great sense of it, what the Kansas football fan base is.
Well, and that's, when there's longing involved, you never really know what happens if you're down 14-0 pretty quickly. Like what you can, the anxiety in the crowd, you can kind of hear it, that buzz, and we'll see what happens at that point. But I think they know they're playing with house money right now. Every single team on the schedule the rest of the way has a winning record. This is going to be kind of a just happy-go-lucky, kind of nothing to lose crowd. It should be a lot of fun. And by the way, Q39 and Joe's Kansas City both have outposts there in the southwestern suburbs of Kansas City, right before you just head straight west to Lawrence. They make it very, very easy to procure their brisket, and the Q39 brisket is still the best my wife has ever had. She's the brisket expert.
Q39?
Q39.
Okay. I have to think about that when I leave the KC airport. What's next?
So is that on the road from the KC airport?
Well, into Lawrence? Is it
depending on how you go? Like, I don't know the best way to go from the airport, but if you basically go all the way down around 435 and then head straight west, you'll be right there.
Okay. We could probably take this conversation offline, but I have meat on the mind, Bill.
I always have meat on the mind, so it's fine.
I love the way the conversation's going here. Let's talk about the Red River Rivalry. That is a mouthful. Texas is a 7-point favorite against Oklahoma in the Cotton Bowl. Let's go, Bill, Rece, Pete.
So I wrote a piece on Wednesday about 10 games that describe the Red River Rivalry, basically. I always enjoy doing those pieces, and it's fun kind of, reliving Spygate from the 70s when Darrell Royal challenged Barry Switzer to a lie detector test to prove they weren't spying on practice, and Switzer then later told a reporter that it was semantics. He said I said my staff didn't spy, and that was true because it was actually Fairbanks' staff before he left a few years earlier who spied. So great stories all around, and it's a weird rivalry. And last time they both were kind of down and playing as unranked teams, the next decade was just nonstop classics and top 10 teams and all that. So it's still going to feel like a big game, even though these two teams are not terrible, but they're both 3-2. My numbers say OU still has a 50-50 shot. They looked really good the first 3 weeks, and my numbers don't know that their quarterback situation feels extremely dire at the moment. So I'm inclined to lean towards Oklahoma, but man, it's hard. That defense got torched so badly the last 2 weeks, and Hudson Card, never mind the Quinn Ewers, will he return or won't he or whatever. Hudson Card looked like a Heisman candidate against West Virginia. They did not do very well on the line of scrimmage in that game, and they still blew out West Virginia because Card just threw the most accurate passes we've seen all year, pretty much. So everything, any trend you find feels like it's pulling you towards Texas, but that's a lot of points to give a team that hasn't won. That's won like one of the last 7 in the series and 3 out of the last 13, something like that. I'm going to go against every instinct I have and go with OU.
I have those same instincts, Bill, because of the way Oklahoma has just found a way. I mean, like even last year, Texas spitting up the big lead, which has become commonplace for Texas. The emergence of Caleb Williams last year. This is the only Big 12 game in which there isn't a ranked team playing. I mean, that's fascinating to me. So it shows it's a different kind of matchup. It's not now, when for Texas. And if I knew Dillon Gabriel was going to be good and able to play the whole game, I would definitely go OU. But I don't know that, and I figure Texas has to be due, or what are they, when are they going to win this game? It's a lot of points to give, but I'm going to sort of hold my nose and lay the points and take Texas, mostly because Oklahoma's defense has been so vulnerable to the big play, and the fact that I don't know for sure how Dillon Gabriel is going to be.
So if I had a quality control analyst to self scout my picking of games the past 5 years, it would show certain trends. Mind you, these are just really things in my mind that I've learned I've hated because you can't predict them, right? One is I hate picking North Carolina because they're completely spastic. Two is military academies are often really hard to project and get a feel for because there's a variance in performance there that I'm sure Bill could quantify, and I'm purely anecdotal. Three is I've just learned I hate picking Red River because it is just a bonkers game every year. You can streamline analysis and look at trends, but man, there's always some sort of defensive touchdown that comes out of nowhere, special team gashes. It is a game where you really can't get an SP plus for the emotion in that stadium. And I know, Rece, you've obviously been to that game. Bill, have you ever been to that game?
No, actually.
No, it is bonkers. Put it on your bucket list. It is probably my favorite college football game to attend, just for the pure spectacle and scene of it. I remember, I think it was 19 when I was there. Shane Beamer was coaching for Oklahoma, and Urban Meyer was there for Fox. And they both stayed and stood on the sideline. You know, those guys had seen some stadiums now, right? And they were both like, wow, this is different. Like, this is something different. So all that said, I'm just going to go completely on who would I feel less good taking, right? Dylan Gabriel's status is up in the air. In this post-Tua era that we're in right now, I'd be pretty surprised if he plays. That's just general thought.
Yeah.
Quinn Ewers' timeline has pointed for him to come back for this game for a month. So if Quinn Ewers plays and Bijan Robinson plays and Xavier Worthy plays, I'm going to take Texas. But this game will not be a blowout. Let me be clear about that. Like, there's just zero chance this game ever is a blowout, which means it probably will be. But I'm going to take the Longhorns. I'm going to assume they cover, and I just think they're going to have superior skill against a defense that has just been an unmitigated mess under Ted Roof. There's no other way to say it. They can't line up. They can't tackle. So if you have the best tailback in the country, presumably a pretty good quarterback with either one, right? Hudson Card's played well, as Bill pointed out, and Xavier Worthy appears to be healthy and kind of clicking again. I just feel like I'm going to bet on the skill, because if I don't, I would just be watching that game Saturday and just get like queasy in my stomach.
This rivalry in the past has been kind of a show of power kind of deal. But one team wins a bunch in a row, and then the other team blows them out and wins a bunch in a row. And we go back and forth, you know, the 2000 Oklahoma game, or the huge 63-14 win. And then Texas does the same 5 years later. So maybe this is where Texas says, okay, we're seizing control and just destroys them. But it's hard. As many close games as we've seen over the last 10 to 15 years in this series, it's really hard to predict that.
All right, I think we got the game of the day here. Utah, a 4.5-point favorite, headed to UCLA. Let's go, Rece, Pete, Bill.
UCLA made a believer out of me last week, and I was a skeptic. Maybe it was too much weight being placed on what I saw in the South Alabama game. They looked sensational against Washington. The question is, can they follow up that type of performance against what I believe to be the most complete team, if not just the outright best team in the Pac-12. I'm going to take Utah and Cam Rising, and Clark Phillips had that great week last week. They sort of they put the hammer down late against Oregon State. So I'm going to go ahead and lay the 4.5 on the road and say that Utah kind of keeps it going before the showdown with USC next week. And there's certainly game day implications for the Utes going on the road into the Rose Bowl in front of tens of people on Saturday afternoon.
Well, I've started, it's early October here in New England, and we're in fall weather, but I may have to dust off the old North Face and get ready for maybe some chillier weather in the shadows of the Wasatch Mountains. I like Utah in this game. I think Utah is essentially a better version of what Chip Kelly has created at UCLA. I think they're better on the interior line. Obviously, Utah has the loss of their star tight end, which is a big factor in this game. That's been a position of strength for both these programs, a little less so now for Utah. But ultimately, the Utes have the 6th best defense in the country. UCLA is the 30th, which is a remarkable uptick. But I am skeptical of who they have played. And I think we see a little bit of a more tested Utah team. I think Cam Rising is the kind of veteran quarterback who can go on the road and deliver a win like this in a likely not that hostile environment. So I'm going to take the Utes.
It's more points than I would like. And in my SP Plus ratings swear that this is going to be a straight toss-up game. What does it have? Like Utah.
How anomalous is it, Bill, if you don't mind me cutting you off, that 4.5 is a difference between the line and your SP Plus? Seemingly from you talking, from us doing this now for 5-6 weeks, that's a pretty big gap.
It's a surprise. I mean, that's at this point, in a given week, like 2/3 of the games will be within like 2 to 3 points. So finding one that's more than that, where there isn't an obvious like injury component to it, like OU Texas, there's a humongous injury component to it, and that's why those numbers are off. But it's a surprise, and I will say, I mean, UCLA, it had a read on UCLA last week. My ratings did. It was much more bullish than I was about their chances against Washington, and that turned out to be bang on. So I guess maybe I should listen to that. Really, though, I'm just rooting for one of my favorite games of the entire season, like from the start, has been the thought of unbeaten Utah versus unbeaten USC, and we won't get that because Utah basically had 2 red zone glitches against Florida, but. We're still on pace for the next best thing. So I hope I'm gonna make my Utah pick with the hope that the Utes will win by 7-10 and set up what should be an unbelievable game. And it really is. I mean, they're a couple glitches away from being a top 5 team right now, and they've looked the part ever since that game ended. Against mostly iffy competition, but I mean, this is two extremely efficient offenses and one extremely efficient defense. The other one being UCLA's defense that still kind of does the bend don't break thing, and we'll see. But I'm going to go with my heart on this one and say Utah.
Very intriguing matchup out in the Big Ten West. Iowa going to Illinois. Illinois, a 3.5-point favorite. Let's go Pete, Bill, Rece.
Well, how the old tables have turned
quick reputationally in the Big Ten West. I give a lot of credit to Brett Bielema, who has essentially built a better meat grinder than Wisconsin and then Iowa. Now we'll see, right? Ultimately, you got to play the game to prove that in its full form. But I really think that Illinois right now. Again, this would have been crazy for us to say, going into the year, right? But I just feel like it would be hard for me to pick against them just because they obviously have the dynamism in the run game. They have the nation's leading rusher, and they have proven to have as good a front seven as anyone in that league. This will not be a high scoring game. It would not surprise me if Iowa blocked a punt and won. Yeah. Is the over under, Bill, lower than the Iowa Rutgers over under? I was told that was the lowest in like 10 years.
I don't think it's that low, but I'm going to look up where it is now because it's this week's. Where would it have to be for you to pick the over game? And I don't really know what that number is because you're talking about Illinois is first in points per drive allowed so far. Iowa's third in points per drive allowed. Neither of them are top 80 on offense. Well, it's down to 35.5 at the moment. So we're getting pretty close to wherever that line is, but this is going to be, well, it's funny because Illinois, and I'm just going to jump in with my analysis, I guess. Illinois, when they hired Bielema, I was just like, are you really, do you think as Illinois, you're going to be able to do the big burly man ball thing better than Wisconsin, better than Minnesota, better than Iowa? We obviously don't know that they can do it against Iowa and Minnesota. We'll find out at home the next 2 weeks, but they sure did against Wisconsin. This was a reeling Wisconsin and whatever, but that was a resounding performance, and it gives me a lot of pause. I'm still going to go with history. I'm going to pick Iowa outright, I guess. But nothing's really going to surprise me there. Putting money on Iowa, even scoring 3 points in any given game, much less against one of the best defenses in the country, is dicey.
I'm going to go with Illinois because I don't have any faith, obviously, for good reason. The worst offense in the Power 5 that Iowa has. But I'm not as much worried about the blocked punt or the block kick going for Iowa as I am the scoop and score, because only 3 teams in the country have lost more fumbles than Illinois. They've lost 7 fumbles. Wow. And for a team that's ground-based, that's a lot. I mean, it's a lot for anybody. But, I mean, when you rely on that and you're not going to have a bunch of possessions in the game, those types of things can be magnified. And the Iowa defense is legit. I'm going to go with Illinois because I just simply cannot pick Iowa until they show something on offense. But I'm worried. I'm worried about the turnovers. I'm worried about because when you've lost that many fumbles, that's not a fluke. That's a propensity to fumble. And it's worrisome. But I'm gonna take Illinois at home and lay the points.
The rare scoop and score call.
If there's ever a game for it.
Yes. Jack Campbell, let's go.
Playing that up there. All right, guys. Florida State. Florida State heading to NC State. NC State a 3.5-point favorite. Let's go, Bill, Rece, Pete.
I need to go back and watch NC State Clemson again. I built it up in my column, and I think we talked about it too. Just like this was Devin Leary's moment to prove that this is a different NC State and everything else. And then they get, it was only 10 points in the end, I guess, but they still just let Clemson get away from them. And I don't really know if that was Leary's fault. Felt like his receivers dropped a lot of passes, but that was tough. I mean, from a number standpoint, they still have the edge here. I think SP Plus says like NC State by 5, so a little more than the line. But I'm really, really worried about a hangover. Just the simple fact that was the biggest game in school history last week. They only sort of showed up for it, and now they've got to go back and get their act together against a very fast Florida State team. That didn't exactly look amazing last week either. Maybe that cancels out. So, man, I don't know. I don't feel good about either one of these teams. Give me the home team, I guess. I'll just take it all back and get the team that's playing at home. I don't know. Like I don't expect a great game from either one of these, come to think of it.
I'm sure our listeners are glad they
listened to like 43 minutes of this podcast for I'll take the home team, Bill.
I got nothing. I don't like this. I don't like this game at all.
Yeah. Is it me or Rece? Sorry.
Rece.
Oh, I'm sorry. All right. I'll pick it up here. I think one of the most disappointing units in all of college football has been the NC State offense. And while you could say that Saturday night in Clemson was Clemson's reemergence as proving that they belong in that ultra elite tier with Georgia and Alabama and Ohio State, I still felt let down by the fact that NC State has this veteran team. Their moment was there and a chance to maybe step up the offensive production, and they didn't do it. And it wasn't just a product of the Clemson defense. It might have been on that night, but they've done this all year. They haven't been as productive. They're, lower middle half in the country in offensive efficiency. And there have been drop passes, there have been miscues and all of that. And this veteran defense too has been really good, but even they, gave up some ground against Florida State. So what's the mental rebound for both of these teams after coming off, less than great performances? I took Wake Forest last week as a super dog to beat Florida State because Wake Forest sort of made believers out of me. But I listened to Pete and what the scouts have said about how talented Florida State is. Florida State's probably getting a little more productivity on offense right now in terms of being efficient, though it wasn't necessarily in evidence last week. I'm going to take Florida State in the points. A little bit of a gut feel here. If NC State is what we thought they could be, then they'll respond and drop the hammer. But I haven't seen enough evidence to believe that yet. So I'm going to take Florida State in the points on the road.
Yeah. The NC State had,
the first offensive lineman off the board in the draft last year, Big Icky. And they return their other 4 linemen. Now, the vexing part about NC State's offense to me is that they've just not been able to run the ball. They right now have the 95th ranked rushing offense in the country, and Florida State, quite frankly, has a really good pass defense. It maybe didn't flash as much against Wake last week, but that is like a solid unit. So I feel like matchup wise, it's going to be very difficult for NC State to just like let Devin Leary rip against Florida State. So these are 2 vulnerable teams. It's a really interesting test of their psyches right now, because you lose this game and your season gets, hairpin turned in a completely different direction than you had thought in September. So I think it's a really intriguing test of the resolve of the coaches to because you fall off a little bit of a cliff now if you lose this game, and a lot of aspirations you were hoping for and aiming for and thought were very attainable all of a sudden slip away. So there's a unique desperation to this game, and when in doubt, NC State has earned our skepticism the past 5 years, right? When the stakes were large, the pack has turtled. It's just been a very simple trend. So again, for my own mental well-being watching games on Saturday, I'm going to take Florida State. And I hope NC State and Devin Leary earn our trust at some point, but it just hasn't emerged yet.
Next week, Florida State hosts Clemson and NC State goes to Syracuse. So whoever loses this game is staring a 3-game losing streak in the face.
Our last game of the day before we get to our locks, Texas A&M, Jimbo Fisher. We've been talking about it all week. He's got checks to cash as he heads to Alabama. The Tide, a 24-point favorite. Stanford Steve had a really interesting question on SV Pod, Scott Van Pelt's podcast. You should listen to that every Tuesday morning. Can Texas A&M score 14 points in Tuscaloosa? Let's go, Rece, Pete, Bill, to zip this one up.
Well, that's the whole thing about the points. First of all, I'm over the whole Jimbo Nick spat thing. Maybe it's because A&M has struggled. Maybe it's because we don't know if the Heisman Trophy winning quarterback is going to be able to play or not. But we'll address it briefly. Mention it probably is a better way to put it on game day. That's not the compelling storyline for Texas A&M and Alabama. It's the direction of the A&M program and how thirsty is Alabama for revenge. That's how you pick the number, because the number jumps out at you as 24. Wow, that's too much. A&M will, can keep it within 24, but then you say, okay, whether it's Milroe, whether, as Pete has alluded to, whether, they might combination of Milroe and Ty Simpson, who's the 3rd string quarterback, 5-star guy for Alabama, or if Bryce Young can play since he's day to day. Are they going to keep them from scoring 42 points? Doubtful. I mean, A&M's defense is okay, but if your offense can't move, you get worn down. So I took Arkansas on the points last week and thought I was looking like a genius there for a while, and then Jahmyr Gibbs went wild. I'm going to take Alabama and lay them at home. I think I'm looking at something probably like a 42-17 game, and that covers easily, right? 42-14 is 28. So I'm going to take Alabama and lay the points.
So, Rece, this is the difference between you
and I. I love the Jimbo Nick stuff. I can't get enough of it. Like you're just a more polished, classy person than me. I really think it's like one of the most fascinating things we've seen in the last decade.
Pete, it was, but now, yes. And it would be if A&M were 5-0.
But see, the difference is I like leaning into this, and you're moving on to the actual football. It's just a difference between us two. That's all. I think it's fascinating, and I am taking Alabama. We could analyze the game, but I'm going to analyze the petty just to think our difference. I just think when this game hits that mid-3rd quarter and there's a decision to keep the foot on the gas or take the foot off the gas from Nick Saban, my general hunch after that Jimbo Fisher press conference is that the pedal will be pushed. That is just a hunch. I do agree with your analysis completely that A&M is going to have a hard time stopping them because they will not be able to hold on to the ball. I think it's that this team has shown consistently that it will flinch when the moment is big, and I don't see that slowing down. So I will take the Tide. I will take them to roll, and I hope we get a little more, juicy storyline other than injured quarterbacks coming out of it.
Yeah, every quarterback in the country is day to day at the moment. Just they're all questionable.
Bill, that keeps me in business. So hey,
that's true. That's true. Yeah, the Saturday wave of so and so will play or won't play. I think you probably got like 138 articles queued up for this week. It's kind of crazy. I see the smart thing, since I'm still slightly ahead of you guys, the smart thing to do would be to just go ahead and pick Alabama too. And I'll, in the name of not feeling stupid about your pick, that would also be the way to go. But I'm going to listen to numbers against my best interests. My SP Plus ratings say 19 is the edge for Alabama, and that does not factor Bryce Young's injury in. The main reason is the A&M still just doesn't give up big plays. First time all year. Last week was the first time all year they gave up more than 21 points, and it was to a Mississippi State team that, as good as, Alabama's probably got a better offense, but Mississippi State still has one of the most unique offenses in the country. And Jalen Milroe, here's the one thing I'm going to lean heavily on as I make a terrible pick. Jalen Milroe last week, the more, if he does end up playing a lot, he was all or nothing. He was 4 for 9 passing, didn't do a lot there, but had a 70-something yard run, and Gibbs had 2 70-something yard runs. It was just, it was 3 plays that basically put that game to bed. A&M prevents big plays, does a very good job against that. Probably won't do that. It won't give up 3 70-yard gains, even if Gibbs looks so stinking fast on those runs. Man, this hurts. I'm going A&M, and I've committed to it. And I can tell you all the numbers and whatnot why, but this one probably does have a lot to do with Saban's general level of mercy, and that doesn't usually show up in games like this.
All right, boys, that's it for picks. What are your locks before we head out?
Bill, give us a lock. You're the numbers guy.
I was actually, you know what? I'm going to lean into the picks I'm going to feel really, really stupid about. Georgia, the last 2 weeks, has underachieved against the spread by 56 points. I don't think there's any serious reason for worry. I assume that's, kind of their attention spans off, and at any moment it could snap back into place, and they're playing Auburn, and they could get Auburn's coach fired if they win, 63-0. And so maybe that all comes to pass, but the line's now up to 30 in that game. And this is another one where, it's not like my numbers are trying to make this a coin toss or anything, but they have it as only Georgia by about 19, because Auburn's defense is very, very good. And Georgia's, this is another one. I feel stupid as the words come out of my mouth, but 30 points is a lot for a team that has underachieved that much in the last 2 weeks and doesn't really have a deep threat right now. Missouri very much took advantage of that. And went a lot of cover zero and was very aggressive up front, and Auburn can do that too. So this could blow up massively, but I'm going to go Auburn with my best bet of the week.
I'm going to go ahead and lay a big number for my lock of the week, which I haven't been great at these for whatever reason, but I don't really know why the BC Clemson line is only 20.5. Night game, Chestnut Hill. I know, sometimes BC's gotten riled up there and sort of fought Clemson for a while. I don't think that's this team. I feel pretty good as Clemson's offense continues to evolve and seemingly get better every week. There's no reason to take the foot off the gas, because they do need to keep getting better. So, and keep building Uiagalelei's confidence. I'm gonna lay that 20.5 that I see with Clemson right now and say that that's my lock against Boston College.
Yeah, that's a good. Looking at what BC's offensive line
has gone through this year, I don't know. There are many position groups in college football who have just sort of been as beaten up and debilitated by serious injuries as they have. I'm going to go with Jeff Hafley's old boss for my lock of the week, Ryan Day. I believe last year, and Bill can check his numbers, Ohio State scored 173 points on Michigan State in the wake of the Mel Tucker contract. That's at least what my memory calls. Now, look, the game is in East Lansing. That could be a factor. Jackson Smith and Jigba is there's some ambiguity around him playing. Travion Henderson did not play last week. He's expected to this week. I just feel like Michigan State is incapable of scoring and Ohio State is excellent at scoring. And did not show any fear in scoring a lot against Michigan State last year, and can put up points in bundles when the offense gets handed the ball quickly, which Michigan State's offense has been elite at doing, giving it back in a timely fashion. So again, I did not take the cheese like you guys did with the 40-point line against the valiant Scarlet Knights who covered that much to my sad delight. But I'm going to take the Buckeyes there in East Lansing to let it rip and really do what they did to Wisconsin.
Travion Henderson and Jackson Smith and Jigba are like two of the 10 best skill core guys in the world. They've barely been healthy all year, and Ohio State's averaged 56 points a game in the last 4 games.
And how about their first road game of the season, too? Yeah. Ohio State and Auburn both going on the road for the first time. Doesn't it feel like Michigan State, Texas A&M, maybe to a lesser degree, but somewhat, Arkansas and Miami all feel like, if you're a student of history, maybe you can go back to some of the old European battles where there was a group that was just totally outmanned, overrun, desolate and distraught, and they've been backed into a corner, and there's one final battle here as to whether they are just going to be obliterated and lose the war for the season, or they have to come out and fight, and even if they don't win, make something of themselves. That's what this feels like with Michigan State to me, and it feels that way for A&M and for some of the other teams I mentioned too. So never underestimate what could happen. Now, there's no way Michigan State wins the game, but never underestimate what happens when you've got no choice, that you are finished, if you don't win this game, because you start looking at bowl eligibility for some of these schools and, or lower tier bowl. I mean, Michigan State after this, they're going to lose. That's going to be 4. And they still have at Michigan, at Illinois, at Penn State. I mean, they're not going to a bowl. I mean, that's going to be 4, 5, 6, 7, unless they somehow, upset Illinois on the road. And no evidence to say they would do that. They're not going to go to a bowl. So, and you can let go of the rope real fast if you get beat 55-0 or something like that on Saturday at home. So
I appreciate the intangible pep talk,
Rece, and I certainly leave the numbers to the expert Bill, but Michigan State's total offense is 92. Their total defense is 100.
No,
those are not good totals.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. They're not going to win, but they have, if they look like they don't belong, again, like they get beat by 50, get beat by 60, then I don't know do they win 2 more games the rest of the year? I mean, it turned fast,
Yes.
It can turn really fast on them.
Yeah, I'm looking at from SP Plus. I'm looking at a 39% chance of bowl eligibility and a 26% chance of going 4-8 or worse.
Man, I think that's a generous chance at bowl eligibility. I mean, look, these are not just losses; these are all double-digit losses, like not in the game losses. The 3 that they've had, and they're not going to be in the game. My question is not whether they'll give them a fight; it's like will they be humiliated? Right. If they lose, if they fight them and they lose 42-17, that's not good. It's not what you're after, obviously, but it does at least they're not just going to go roll over, right. And that's what I wonder about, to see how they're going to react, especially if let's say they get down 21-0 in the first quarter. They have a first half like Oklahoma had against TCU. They give up 500 yards in the first half. What happens then? But it'll be fun on Saturday. It won't be fun for Michigan State, but it'll be fun for us watching it for sure.
I feel like next week on the pod, Rece,
we're going to be discussing the length and value of Mel Tucker's guaranteed contract. I have a feeling that will be a pod topic.
My opinion has not changed on that in the last 10 months or whatever. It's
yeah. it's a rough look. They had a great season last year, and good for them. But one season does not a program build. Takes a little while, takes a little patience. Same for some of these other teams that are struggling as well. I wish you all just enough luck to finish a game behind me in the standings this week.
Thank you, Rece.
You're welcome. This has been the College Game Day Podcast. Your picks, and of course, play responsibly, as we always say. You can listen to the podcast 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, wherever you like to get your podcast. And we will see you from beautiful Lawrence, Kansas on Saturday morning on College Game Day. Thanks for listening. Download wherever it is that you like to get your podcast. We'll see you next week.